have my laptop pulled up. I have a Mac, right? And so my text messages, I have that on my phone so I can see. That was weird. I have it on my phone. So I have my laptop in front of me because that's where I pull up where I write my book reviews, obviously. And one of my best friends, we send each other podcasts, okay? She sent me a total of 45 minutes worth of voice messages. And I cannot wait to dive in. Okay. And I take notes. I take notes on her voice messages. We live 3,000 miles apart. Okay. And I take notes. And I then respond. And it also is a good 30 to 40 minute response, okay? Like I have to set time aside to do this. But when your close people, the people that you are closest to, sometimes live far away, you do what you have to do. And I cannot wait. Because I know there is some tea in this. Good tea. Good tea. And I can't wait to respond in kind because since my last voice message, I have updates in my own life. You know, this is what we do. Anyway. So, and my sister, I like to send my sister pictures of my food. And she's like, why do you send me this? I'm like, I'm trying to expire. Let me type back. I'm giving you food inspiration. Okay, that is all. Hi, my name is Alana. Welcome to my YouTube channel. And on this channel, we review books. And this review I'm pulling it out of the archives. As you can tell by the title, it is Tess of the D'Urbervilles by Thomas Hardy. And I read this book back in 2021. And there's a hair stuck to my lip. And I buddy read this with another close friend of mine. And I felt like reviewing this. I've only read 2 Thomas Hardy novels. This one and Far from the Madding Crowd. And I don't know, I looked at it on my shelf and I was like, this needs a YouTube review. Victorian literature is actually one of my favorite time periods for literature. It is wild. So let's dive into this. I don't know. I haven't looked at this review since 2021. I read it in April of 2021. No, I reviewed it in April of 21. So that means I read it in March of 21. Let's dive in because I can't remember. I remember the story, but I can't remember what I thought about it or what I picked up, what quotes I pulled. And I don't think I've done one of these reviews where I say I pulled it out of the archive. So let's dive in together. Once victim, always victim. That's the law. Lies. I didn't read it in 2021. I actually read it in 2020. I said we were finally able to meet up in the spring of the following year to discuss it over the weekend. That is adulting these days, man. She's one of my closest friends. Hi, Rebecca. And we talk all the time. We also send each other long podcast messages, not quite as long as me and my other friend, but these long messages, and they're a riot. And I was saying like, oh, we spend more time talking about everything else before we remember we have books to discuss. Still accurate. And we always have good food and drinks. Anyway, Tess of the D'Urbervilles centers around the main character and female protagonist named Tess, and she was assaulted at a young age, and this pays an emotional toll on her. And because of this assault, and again, this was scandalous back in the day. This was scandalous for Victorian England. So Hardy shows how this incident impacts her future relationship, and not only that, her position in society. Hardy sheds light on the hypocrisy of Victorian society, how, and it's interesting because you have a man critiquing men and taking up for the perspective of women during this time, and how if a man does something, he is able to get away with it, regardless of what's been in his past. They get to be redeemed. They get to reinvent their characters, whereas Women in this particular culture, in this particular period in space and time, they are not granted that opportunity. So he is shaking his finger at a double standard, and he uses Tess to do that. As soon as she could reflect, it appalled her. This changed in their relative platforms. He who had wrought her undoing was now on the side of the spirit, while she remained unregenerate. I'm already starting to wonder. There are so many books I want to reread, but all the books and not enough time. I have a 9 to 5 I gotta go to. If I didn't have a 9 to 5, I could do all the books read all the books in the world. But how am I gonna pay for said books? I'd be living on the streets, and I ain't built for the streets. Okay, I could throw hands, but I'm not built for these streets. So there is this commentary that Victorian society put more pressure on women to be pure. So it also gives rise to the idea of sin. What is sin? And what about a sin that is committed towards a person that is outside of their control? In a way, you also have Hardy here critiquing the church and the religious system. All sins cannot be categorized the same way. There are shades of gray and a level of empathy that needs to be present. That's what we gathered that Hardy was saying. Again, because if you are to practice what you preach, then you would have way more compassion for the victim. And the victim in this story that Hardy is using this to critique is Tess. Tess is the true victim here. Anybody who's been abused in any way, oftentimes there's this thing called victim blaming, because to the public, people can present however they want to. And so they're gaslighting these people. I hope I'm even making sense. You see this a lot when you have people who the crime was committed against them, but they have to carry the weight of the crime often the most. They're the ones who have to deal with the mental turmoil that's left over and the trauma. They're the ones who have to do the work. Where often the people who did this to them are roaming around. They get to have their cake and eat it too. And this person here is like, now I have to be left with the damage. Let's move on, because that was nothing but word salad. But that is what editing is for. So anyway, Hardy, long story short, is presenting this idea that, there is no empathy in this society, and so poor Tess is just carrying the weight of it on her shoulders. She's the one who's demonized, where those who did the sin to her are roaming around doing whatever they want to do. But, she said tremulously, suppose your sin was not of your own seeking. So in that case, was it really a sin, right? If it's done to you and you couldn't control it. But again, this is a woman in a society where purity, I'm talking about sexual purity, sexual morality is the end all be all, right? Once a woman has fallen, she has fallen forever. That's the society that we're dealing with. So, but in Tess of the D'Urbervilles, Hardy again is also advocating for how in this society, women's stories are their perspectives, the instances of the incidents that are happening to them are not taken as seriously, and they're also viewed as comedic. So from the other characters, and so even other women, Tess is just not taken seriously, regardless of what has happened to her. And what has happened to her was serious, very serious. It was a crime. It was assault. Yes, there was pain in it. The question of a woman telling her story, the heaviest of cross to herself, seemed but amusement to others. It was as if people should laugh at martyrdom. I remember when my friend, I'm just looking at my notes, it's amazing how, even though I haven't read this book in years, right, almost for a little over 4 years, because I read it at the end of 2020, but looking at my review, and this is one reason why I do write such detailed reviews, so that when I choose to revisit a book, or I want to look, it remains quite fresh in my mind, and a lot starts to come back to me. So one thing that my friend and I discussed is that we felt like Tess was a bit like the tragic Greek heroine. She endures horrible circumstances that were outside of her control, and no matter how much she tries to move away from her past, she cannot escape. She also has a fatal flaw, if you will. She doesn't stick up for herself. And you could say it's harder for her to stick up for herself given the social environment that she's in at this time, this era in which she's living in, that does put constraints on her that say, me in the 21st century, I can be, it's encouraged for me to be quite vocal, right? Especially in a Western culture in America, right? Be loud, right? Americans, like, that is our culture. The squeaky wheel gets the oil. But in this time and place in Victorian England, no, shut up. You sit over there, woman. That's the culture, right? I mean, this is the 1800s. So, yes, she doesn't stick up for herself, though she still technically could. She'd probably get demonized for it, but she could. But as the novel progresses, the reader does, and Hardy does a good job with this, get the sense that there is a pressure building up in Tess, and eventually that pressure is going to boil over. And we all know what happens when you've had enough, right? It's like when you shake up a soda bottle or a soda can, eventually it's going to explode. Another interesting element that Hardy weaves throughout this novel is this concept of ancestry. So how much are we destined to endure certain hardships based on what our ancestors experienced? This actually goes in line very well with the question that John Steinbeck asked in East of Eden, the concept of generational cycles and generational curses. Can we fully break away from our heritage, or is it impossible to escape one's generational curses? Very interesting. Sinister design lurked in the woman's features, a concentrated purpose of revenge on the other sex. So it seemed to him then. The Caroline bodice of the portrait was low, precisely as Tess's had been when he tucked it in to show the necklace, and again he experienced the distressing sensation of a resemblance between them. Despite this having been written in, let's get the precise date, 1891. So at that point, Victorian England is about to head into the Edwardian period, and not too long from that. Just give it a little bit, but maybe about a decade or so, almost. But you're at the tail end of the Victorian period at that point. But regardless, 1891, there is something very modern about Tess of the D'Urbervilles, and oh my gosh, I'm over here looking like, when was this published? I wrote it right here in the review. Hardy does an excellent job capturing the female voice. And if you were to take the author's name off of this book and just give you the manuscript without knowing the author, anything about the author, it would not be far-fetched to say or to think that a woman wrote this narrative. Because yes, men and women do write differently. They're going to tackle topics differently, which I think is great. I'm a woman. I know what I think. I know how I feel. I mean, of course, no, women are not a monolith, but we still approach things. We can still say that we approach things differently than a man. Want to know why? Because I'm not a man. So he did an excellent job, I think, at capturing this voice with this particular type of story in particular. And again, I've only read two Hardys, Far from the Mighty Crowd and Tess of the D'Urbervilles. I need to get into more Hardy. I have other Hardys on my shelf, like Jude the Obscure and a couple others. But one thing that he does very well from what I've read thus far is he knows how to write people. He also knows how to write scenery, but like English countryside, chef's kiss. But his characters are very flawed and human, and there's a reason why he was scandalizing the Victorians. He's just, the man can turn a phrase, the way that he can write about the mundane things in life, like milking a cow, right? It's poetic, okay? In a different way than Dickens, though, in a different way. But also, even though we're dealing with the assault of a woman here, that is at the crux of this novel and thus shapes this character and her narrative moving forward once the incident happens. Because this is also Victorian England, it's not graphic, okay? So a lot of things are alluded to. So if you are a person who I don't like to read about certain topics or whatever, you're not going to get gory details. Again, if this was published, written by a modern author, perhaps, I mean, we tend to be a lot more graphic these days, perhaps, or not. Some people choose still not to. But I think it makes things more palatable, if you will, if you're sensitive to certain topics. But again, like I say, the best authors show, they don't tell. And I think it actually takes more skill to be subtle than to just lay it all out. Anyway, this was a fantastic novel. I remember really enjoying it. When I read it, my friend and I rated it a 4 out of 5. So I haven't read a Victorian novel in quite some time, but I do have two. I'm looking down at my shelf. I do have two pinned for this. I'm thinking. I do have two pinned for this year. I'm just looking. Is New Grub Street Victorian or is it Edwardian? Hold on. Oh, it was published the same year as Tess, 1981. Nope, 1891. So it's Victorian. But again, it's straddling some fences. Anyway, I cannot wait to dive into more Victorian lit this year. One is a reread, Belette, and the other one will be New Grub Street. Anyway, it's always nice to go back to some classics. So have you read Hardy, Tess of the D'Urbervilles? If you are a fan of Hardy, what is your favorite Hardy novel? Because I've only read two. I have Jude the Obscure on my shelf. I was looking at it the other day and I was like, I need to read that. But anyway, that is all. Please feel free to like, subscribe, and leave me a comment. Also, feel free to follow me on Instagram, where I get up to more bookish shenanigans. I post all of my book content there first, and I post the occasional goofy reel in the Instagram stories because I can. All right, it has nothing to do with books. It's just I laugh about something that is just goofy. That's all. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.